And good morning, everybody. I know some of you are arriving here, so wanted to come on screen, welcome you to this Humanities Team Community Circle program. We're going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. And wow, June 5th here, hard to believe we're coming into the summer months here already. I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and a stunning morning here in Boulder. Really beautiful out. I hope it's beautiful in your part of the world. I invite you to just relax, get your feet up, grab some water, tea, kombucha. A lot of us in Humanities Team love kombucha. And just get ready to relax into a great hour. As well, as you know, during these programs, we do invite you to come in and share. So if you've got particular things that you'd like to get to here during the hour in a little bit, we're going to open up the mic here to talk about your conscious journey, things that you'd like to share. Some of you are going through our master classes, and if you have questions or comments, things that you want to bring in, we'll want to invite you to do that here as well. And let's see, we've got just about less than a minute here, and we're going to get started this morning. Really looking forward to this hour with you. We are going to an every other week process here beginning next week. So we'll be doing these every other week. As you know, we opened this up to everybody on a weekly basis while we're in this pandemic. But the pandemic is starting to lift, so that's good news, isn't it? Certainly are still challenges out there, which is why we want to continue these. But the pandemic is starting to lift, and so we're starting to get back to a little bit more to normal. So that's good. So I think it's the top of the hour. Let me just formally welcome you all. You know, again, thank you for joining us here for this Community Circle program. I'm Steve Farrell, and I'm the Worldwide Executive Director for Humanities Team. Humanities Team is a 17-year-old 501c3 nonprofit. Our whole focus is supporting people on their conscious journey, creating planetary awakening, and creating flourishing at every level of life, which is to say then in our own life, in our homes, in communities, with our co-workers, in our country, and in the world. So we're a nonprofit, and that's our entire focus. Now, normally, these programs that we're doing here for Community Circle are for Community Circle members, but we opened this up here just a little while back to all of the Humanities Team community to come in because of the coronavirus pandemic. And of course, when we go back here a couple of months, things were very challenging. They're still challenging, actually. There's a lot of emotional challenge. Even recently, you know, an organization that based out of San Francisco called Salesforce.com, that's a real progressive company. A guy named Mark Benioff is the CEO of Salesforce.com, and he is calling for CEOs to become activists, and said that there's no room any longer for CEOs just to be focusing on shareholders, you know, on the bottom line. We couldn't agree more in Humanities Team. The companies should be taking a focus as activists, supporting all of the stakeholders, which are not just stockholders, but communities in the world. That's what the future holds. This old style focus on just increasing revenues and profits doesn't really have a place anymore. So we applaud Mark Benioff. But I was bringing him in as an example because he was polling his organization that has like 25,000 or something employees, and a large percentage shared that they're facing emotional difficulty, emotional challenges. So isn't that interesting? And the average employee at Salesforce.com makes over $200,000 a year. So just this whole process of sequestering and not being involved with others socially. And also, of course, COVID-19, where people come down with it and somebody in their family or their friends or a coworker has got it, or many people that are still challenged financially. They were laid off or they were cut back or their portfolio was hit or something. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why people would be emotionally challenged now. So that's another reason that we opened this up here to our whole community, was just so that we could come in, let our hair down, talk together, and share, about this conscious journey and share about challenges that are going on in our home. I see our special guest has arrived here. Terry, welcome to the program. Good to see you.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm delighted to be here with you and everybody.
Fantastic. So, and I'm going to give you an introduction here in just 1 minute. Let me, as I shout out to everybody, we're also on Facebook Live. So we're broadcasting over Zoom to our humanities team community. But we're also broadcasting right now to our worldwide Facebook page, which is 667,000. So welcome to all of you on the that are part of the worldwide Facebook community, the community circle members, people that are going through all of the master classes, and there are 4 or 5 of them that are going on right now. So welcome to all of you, and welcome to other viewers that have just tuned in here. So let me go ahead and give my special guest an introduction. So Terry Patton is here with me today, and Terry is a philosopher. He's an author, he's an activist, a social entrepreneur, consultant, coach, and the author of this groundbreaking book that you've maybe heard of, A New Republic of the Heart, an ethos for revolutionaries. And I've had the privilege of knowing Terry now for about a decade, and he is the real deal. He is, you maybe have followed his book or his work. He's out in the world doing a lot of really important stuff right now, even before the pandemic. And what I can see, he's ratcheted that work up here with the pandemic going on, feeling, as we do in the humanities team, that now is our time to really step into it, and each of us making that individual decision to step into that circle of responsibility and to say yes, and to understand what station that we're to go to in life. But let me go to Terry here, and just in Terry's own words, Terry, welcome, and just if you want to share a little bit about yourself and your programs as we get started.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be gathering with you and begin to get to know this face of humanities team. You do so much, Steve. There are many facets to this multifaceted gem. Well, my background, really just super briefly, was I was raised in an intentional community by social activists in the peace and civil rights movement back in the earliest of early days in the 50s and 60s, and was kind of an activist very young in high school and college, and then had kind of a reckoning with the fact that I had to become a different being altogether in myself. I spent the first half of my adult life as a full-time spiritual practitioner in an ashram, and then had a brief career kind of bringing consciousness technology to the world. I was an entrepreneur and kind of managed, I'd squandered my middle-class advantages in the ashram. I was able to kind of regain my ability to have some choices in my life through that business. But then since then, I've been working partly through an affiliation with the integral world. I wrote a book with Ken Wilber on practice. But then I was always aware that we had this paradox of having so many riches, and in some ways being the luckiest people who have ever lived, with unprecedented access to information and wisdom and basic safety and even comfort and ability to travel and on and on and on. But we were also facing a civilizational predicament that was absolutely not sustainable, and that it really mattered, what would be happening in my life. So I began to really try to integrate everything I understood from a whole vast range of fields, from evolutionary theory, neuroscience, game theory, et cetera, to just make sense of what was going on. And I wrote a book 4 times. I first wrote it in the early 2000s and wasn't quite right. The synthesis wasn't robust enough, and I threw it away. I threw away 3 versions of this book, but A New Republic of the Heart finally came out in 2018. But since about 2015, seeing how fast our ecological predicament was intensifying, I just cleared the decks and focused my whole attention through the nonprofit A New Republic of the Heart on giving my energy, trying to come into integrity, you might say, with future generations. And it was apparent to me that what was necessary, although we could see lots of, I can see this problem and maybe that would solve that, and this one over here, maybe this would be a good way to address that. They tended to take us all into different perspectives, different orientations. And yet there was something at the core, and that would require a whole systems transformation, and it would require a big fancy word, ontological, a transformation of our very way of being, a deep transformation at the very core of every individual and in our way of relating to one another. So of late, what I've been focusing on is helping groups of people find their way into really profound soul level depth, so that all of what is most mature, wise, caring, and curious and awake and able to change is elicited by our ways of being with one another. And there gets to be an upward spiral of building capacity among groups of people. And so we have a new book coming out called Being the Change 2019. That's the record of the social experiment we held. We held a 1-year social experiment during the year of 2019. And we're finally publishing our findings in just a couple of weeks. So I'm super inspired about that. But I'm also, just like I think everybody, things in our world are so out of balance and so rapidly changing that I'm asking myself all kinds of questions about white supremacy and privilege and the way that I'm used to just tolerating some things that really shouldn't be tolerated. I'm looking deeply at the root causes of the way the human beings are on the planet that would give rise to the many viruses traveling from animals to humans, and thinking deeply about how it is that we begin to cut ourselves off from one another through the social distancing process at a time when we need to come together. So I ask a lot of deep questions, and I really endeavor to get down with other people in a way that our spiritual practice enables us to become more profoundly, deeply present and receptive to one another, so that our very way of being together begins to shift into something new and healthier.
Yeah, beautiful. And Terry, I love that you use the term sort of clear the deck, where you could see, there's an existential crisis here on the earth, right? I have teenagers, and we talk openly about it. That what that means is, as we go out decades, and we don't know how long, but we basically don't have a habitable planet if we don't make some changes. But the interesting thing is this whole conscious journey for us individually and for us collectively, it's not like it's a sacrifice as we step into new ways of living on the earth. And the irony is it's not a sacrifice at all. The most succulent fruit is found in conscious living, which is also the thing that heals the existential crisis on the earth, where we understand that it's just like nature. It doesn't sit at the bird feeder all day, like a corporation focused on profit all day. It comes back to the bird feeder at the end of the day after spending all of this beautiful time in nature. So we're just kind of coming back into ourselves, understanding that the real prosperity in life is where we're just in creating loving environments with each other and the earth and life. Uh, that's where the true riches are found. I've got, I shared on the last program. I've got a book I'm just about done with called Beyond the American Dream, because I had this opportunity to live out near where Terry is. Terry's up in Northern California. I was there in Silicon Valley and started some technology companies that really took off. But and I was living and working with these entrepreneurs and also CEOs running companies that had a lot of financial prosperity. But I was also in something called Forum, where we talk confidentially about what's really going on in our life, and in our families, and with our spouse, and in our company, and with our kids and things. And candidly, there were lots of challenges, and I could see that the real prosperity wasn't just kind of trying to double and then double again, which is kind of how the American dream works, our financial prosperity. But the real dream is out beyond that, which is what Terry and I are talking about. And so it's ironic that we actually create a much richer life for ourselves and our family, and where we journey consciously. And at the same time, we're creating this healing that's just for the planet, so that we don't have to be, as Terry mentioned, sort of dropping everything, clearing the deck of we got to get to it because we're, there's a huge challenge here.
Well, it's really important, I think, that we recognize that we've been given apparently, it's so deeply paradoxical that, at least from some perspectives, it's like an impossible question. And that, in my book, I use this metaphor, but it's one that comes up to my mind many, many times. You've all heard of Zen Koans, these impossible questions like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Or, show me your original face, the one you had before your parents were born. And in Rinzai practice, there are a whole series of them. Many of them are much more like stories than they are like such a clear, crisp question. But nonetheless, the guy who originated that koan practice was named Dogen. He had very wise, deep man who'd traveled to China and gotten all the great practices and brought them to Japan, and was really a founder of Zen Buddhism. And Dogen wrote this book called Genjo Koan. And Genjo Koan meant, effectively, you're being given impossible questions by your life all the time. And if you relate to them like I'm telling you to relate to these teaching riddles, and you just sit with them, you let them stop your mind, you let them shift your consciousness, you let them transform you. But you have to answer that. You have to get the right answer to what is the sound of one hand clapping. You have to get, and that is essentially the ordeal of living. Well, all of us have together now been given a series of impossible questions. How do you, in your own being, help this whole society that you're a part of, that you've been shaped by? A society that is addicted to fossil fuels, in which every individual, including yourself, has gotten into habits of consumption that are unsustainable, maybe another kind of addiction, in which there is a pattern of racism and white supremacy that's creating pressures that are creating these disturbances, in which there are all these things that, without even recognizing it, you've adapted to, that need to change. How can you be showing up right now in a way that embodies a transition, that helps there be a transition, instead of just being a passive participant in something that is killing the life support systems upon which your children and grandchildren's future is going to depend. So so in a way, it is about ratcheting up the seriousness. But in another way, we can't respond to that in a way that's adequate, except with really deep lightheartedness and fundamental contact with the incredible gift of life, and fundamentally grateful, celebratory mood, like really not losing touch with the sacred gift of this day, of this breath, of this moment. And it's there that you get the energy to show up for something that's seemingly impossible. And it seems to me that this is like a transformational crucible in which our souls are being prepared for another level of human maturity. And so my work and my intentions are to help people to really find their way in an authentic way into contact with each other at that level of depth that can catalyze us into being the very best versions of ourselves we can. Because, you know, this is such a tough moment, and Central Casting sent you and me to be here now. And so this is our cue. So how can we respond to this adequately? Let's have some lightheartedness and the adequate seriousness to really take that where it can go.
Amen. Yeah, beautiful, Terry. So, and we're going to, as we always do here during these community circle programs, we're going to take your questions here in a little bit after Terry and I chat for a little bit. And there really are a couple of different themes here, and of course any questions that you want to bring in as well. But one is, as I was mentioning when Terry was coming on, there are lots of people that are challenged emotionally right now, just with all of the things going on in the world. Anxiety, difficulty, it could be related to a health concern with COVID-19. Of course, now we've got the whole response to racial injustice. And then people have lost their jobs. So there are many different things going on that could be that could be creating challenges. Now, the other thing is often when there are challenges like this, there's a desire to step up and to serve, and especially for us that haven't been as impacted, that are, I'll call it blessed. So one of the things we'll talk about which kind of relates to Terry's work and our work in the humanities team are what are the things that we can do to be in service? How can we help others, you know, if we've got a little extra time? So maybe, Terry, we can turn to that. I know as part of your work, you're inviting people to service to clear their own deck, to help, and even, and have some fun with a sense of humor too. On the journey. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. What I began to see was that there were many, many good-hearted people who were, who'd had an intuition through meditation or psychedelic medicine journeys or just their church prayer life and spiritual life, or many, many different things, communities. They had an intuition of our fundamental oneness. And they also were caring to be really healthy, helping brothers and sisters to the whole human family. But that we'd all gotten caught into patterns where greed, anger, and ignorance, as the Buddhists would put it, were more in the driver's seat than our better angels of our nature. And that we as good, true, and beautiful as various causes are, just doing activism as we are wasn't going to be enough. We had to change more deeply. That's why I went from being an activist to going into an ashram. But of course, I saw in the ashram that focus on the inner work had to be yoked to our care and our action on behalf of others. And then ultimately I saw, this inner work, outer work way of looking at it is incomplete because it's how we relate to each other. It's the inter work, the interpersonal work where we can actually help each other and more can happen. And that if we're really honest with ourselves, as rich and enjoyable as many of our friendships are, we could go deeper. Like if you in your most enlightened moment and your friend in his or her most enlightened moment, you make eye contact and you show up with a kind of generosity and transparency, a willingness to be seen in the totality of your not perfect humanity, and your care to be of benefit to the world, those come forward. There's something else in that space. So I just stopped offering as I had. I kind of made my living offering courses that I taught as essentially a spiritual teacher during those years, or might say a psychological and spiritual and philosophical teacher, kind of all rolled into one. But instead, I just wanted to have a social experiment. Let's see if we can make progress. Like, caring people are seeing that the old game ain't working and they're trying to break through and do something new. That's a field of study. And it's not a field of study that's just abstract papers at universities and academic. No, it's learning by doing. We have to try it out, be the most enlightened friends to one another we possibly can, get some things about that right, but get some things wrong, see what's working best and worst, make changes to what we're doing, iterate. You know, it's kind of what's called prototyping and iterating, and this field will advance. So we did this, and we have a community now that's international, global. We meet on Zoom, we meet online, but we really go deep. We have small meetings with 2, 3, 4, 5, and we think what we're doing is actually distilling some best practices. And that's what we're publishing in this book, Being the Change 2019. So, and we're opening the doors actually now to our community. We have a website, it's called Being of Benefit, not Being the Change, beingofbenefit.com, where we explain that, that invitation. But it's what I wanted to do was to work with people whose heart had been pierced by the nature of the moment and who wanted to just make a radical commitment to just, let's do it. Let's bring ourselves fully forward. And when you're that committed, you have the adequate maturity and humility to actually do something different with one another. That's a hard thing for people to do. We are very, very, very strongly patterned by habits, and the habits of humanity have gotten us into this jam. And every one of us, and particularly perhaps our forebears, wanted more safety or more ability to consume tasty food or have more mobility or whatever it was. There was some kind of additional enjoyment or pleasure that caused us to have all of what we call progress, but also all of what we call environmental destruction. And so all of us are patterned to a way of living that is going to have to change. And it's like we've met the enemy and he is us. And we're not going to be able to win this battle unless we love ourselves completely, forgive ourselves completely. But we're not going to get to that if we don't do the sacred act that is called in the religions repentance. And you know, repentance is sort of like, it seems judgmental, but it's not about hanging your head or tail between your legs or I'm bad or anything like that. It's just like, I get it. I want to be different. I get that this implicates me. And that brings forward what's noble in the heart. And it's the meeting of people in that noble response that I think has the seeds for the energy that can actually break out of the logjam we have tended to find ourselves in increasingly during my whole life.
So Terry, let me bring in a question here. And so thank you, viewers. We've got a number of questions here. We're going to get to as many as we can here. So one of the questions is, how do you see the connection between environmental destruction, climate change, and the COVID-19?
Well, we probably have more human beings living on this planet right now than the natural environment can sustain. It's certainly living in with as many of us living as high off the hog, so to speak, as we are. And therefore, we're crowding into wild places. So this has caused people to have incursions into what were wild places, so that they're eating chimpanzee or monkey meat in Africa, and AIDS comes into being, or Ebola, or in China they're eating bats and so forth. It's not just the eating of them, but living near them. It was probably more through the bat guano, but maybe there were also, I mean, what's going on right now is that we do not have a, we don't have an orderly and workable way to make intelligent collective decisions. That's why we have such broken politics and leadership in the United States, but also in many other worlds. All of that is happening. I call it the meta crisis. So the link between COVID and the ecological predicament is it's complex. I mean, there are people who believe that it might have been formulated in a lab and slipped out and so forth. And of course, there's so much complexity there once you get into the conspiracy theories. Declaring that you know how things are is a mistake. But what we're up against is the fact that we're all part of a very complex, amazing worldwide system that has given us more privilege and convenience and opportunity than humans have ever had before. And yet, in various ways, it's got thin, long, just-in-time supply lines. It's got non-redundancy, so it's optimized for efficiency, not for robustness. That fragility, we very well can have interruptions of the things we need, and all of that, particularly with worldwide travel, has made this particular pandemic spread so quickly and be so intrusive. So I don't think that it even is accurate to just draw parallels between the ecological predicament and COVID in isolation. I think it's important to understand that we're in a meta crisis. There's a crisis in the worldwide financial system. There's a crisis in healthcare in all over the world, but especially in the United States. There are crises in many of our institutions. Our politics is gridlocked. There's culture war. There's so many things at the same time are reaching this kind of stuck point. And that's not really one, it is one phenomenon. And it is kind of a crisis, yes, but it isn't like just as we are, we'll go through this crisis and go back to how we were. It's like we're all gonna really have a transformation of the way we do things. And some of that feels scary. And so it takes a character building to where we can be with everything we fear and everything that seems to threaten us and threaten everything we love in a clear-eyed and sober and grounded way. And really keep opening our hearts, really discover that this is our cue, this is our chance to be everything that's best in us. And not just in us as individuals, but in the way we can be with one another. And when we begin to recognize that, it actually it's good news. In a way, we've lived our lives in what could be called a decadent society, where we're reduced to being viewers or consumers or people with opinions and made passive in that decadent, unsustainable world. And now there's a crisis, but we get to be participants in something that matters and that actually asks for what's deepest in our souls and in our hearts. And that is good news. There's some scary stuff. And in a way, every one of us has to, that's why I talked about the repentance idea. It's it's almost like an addiction intervention, like, oh yeah, I accepted all those little bribes of convenience and pleasure and this and that, and I'm kind of habituated to them. And maybe things are going to change and I might have to swear off some of my addictions. And that part of going sober isn't very comfortable, but it makes you a better person. And if you turn to a higher power and you make amends and you commit yourself to a new way of life, like in the 12 steps, something different can happen. And we're all able to maybe hold each other's hands through a process that ennobles us and that brings forward our best. And that's what I'm trying to do with people that I work with, and what I'm hoping that we can help Humanities Team and every community of caring people who are awakening and intending to be of benefit to others, that if we do that, we can show you what we're learning and maybe be of help, and then learn from you. And then this whole field of study, how can we come into integrity with everyone who's been left out, human and more than human, and come into something closer to being sustainable. And whether, I'm in conversation with people who are very pessimistic, who think we're headed for near-term societal collapse, and they think they know that that's where it's going. I mean, they're very emphatic, some of them. And I stay in conversation with them because I want to make an unconditional commitment to be love no matter what. And I want others who have the sobriety, seriousness, and strength to make a commitment that radical. And then I want to have a lot of fun doing all of the loving, constructive things that we can possibly do together to, even in the worst case scenario, more of the human flower can bloom and blossom and open before it wilts. Or maybe we can give birth to seeds that let a whole new quality of what's best in us blossom and flower. I hope so. That's kind of my prayer, and that's what I'm trying to make my life, everything I do, a prayer for.
Yeah, that's beautiful here again, Terry. Thank you. Let me add to that. Maureen, I want to thank you for the question. I didn't share your name when I brought the question, and the question was, how do you see the connection between environmental destruction, climate change, and COVID-19? And I'd like to invite everybody, actually, viewers, to feel into that for yourselves. What do you come away with there? What Terry described is beautiful, and the words I would put to that are, it relates to my own journey, which is that we grow up in this world often with this whole focus on career, bigger, better, more, really. I use the term American dream of just pursuing a profession that where there's financial prosperity and opportunity for power over and all of these kinds of things. And I think we lose touch, really, with who we really are on that journey. And we lose touch with that as we look out the window. I'm blessed. I'm looking out right now on this sunny day, nature, the leaves that are blowing in the wind. We lose touch with this, that we're on a living planet. It's alive, it's sacred. There's the divine is actually in these trees that I'm looking at, and Terry, in each of you, in viewers. We lose touch with the beauty of this living planet that is divinely bestowed and inspired. and manifest it. And that's where this whole the problem sets in that creates environmental destruction. And now this is just my thesis. I'm not trying to, again, there's no absolute answer to Maureen's question, but I believe that just as in our lives, when crisis comes upon us, as it often in the course of a life, there's crisis, many times over, there's always a silver lining. There's some reason for that crisis that allows us to emerge from the crisis better and more healthy than we went in. And so the COVID-19 crisis, I believe that possibly part of the reason for it was to give us this sequester space to be going within and to be getting in touch with our deeper values and our deeper self and the deeper invitation when I talk about this living planet that's around us. So we're not just losing touch with it and just running out the door, ignoring what's in front of us to go achieve some checklist that really has nothing to do with life itself. And this is why in Humanities Team, we're very much calling for, let's not let this just be a pause button, because clearly it's at least that, where we came to full stop, now we're starting to come out of it. But pause just means pause. We stop and then we keep going forward. The invitation here, I believe, in COVID-19 is that we pause and we don't keep going in the same direction. We're getting in touch with these deeper things within each of us. And then we're setting out in a new direction, a conscious direction, where we're aware of life around us, and where we create a richer, life, and we create a habitable planet. So just to add to what Terry has there, let me bring in some other questions here. So on Facebook, Elizabeth says we need to unite throughout the nations. Our voices need to be heard. Climate change is crucial for all living beings. Present and most important, the future of our very existence. This problem is us. We need to unite and stand our ground. Do you want to speak to that, Terry?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yes, of course. I think what the fundamental sentiment that Elizabeth was expressing, was it Elizabeth?
Elizabeth, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Of course, that's right. And for me, when I hear that, it resonates with a part of me that really doesn't just want to talk about it. I want to do something, and I want to do something that makes an impact at the scale that's necessary. And then I want to declare a kind of more ambitious intention. Let's all unite and let's actually change this whole crazy, slow motion train wreck it seems to be going on. Let us, it's like the Titanic. You break into the steering room and you wrench the tiller from the people who are steering you into the iceberg, that kind of thing. And I feel that too. And I think that any caring person does. And it's also true, though, that if I rush into action with some aspects of my analysis kind of correct, but kind of unconscious to other aspects of how I'm being, we're already in a pretty chaotic situation, and I may really add to the chaos of that situation instead of bringing a higher coherence and harmony. So there are multiple bottom lines. One of the bottom lines is effective action at the scale necessary to deal with the fundamental problems, which is what I heard in her question. And another bottom line is really, really becoming appropriately humble and serious in transforming our lives. And if you need to be meditating every day, doing that. If you need to be exercising every day, doing that. You need to be reading certain kinds of uplifting spiritual literature that align you every day, doing that. If you become aware of a way that you can, just like right in this moment, I noticed that in trying to answer this question, my energy was kind of up in the top of my chest and into my head. And if I bring myself into real contact with everything going on, I notice that I'm really caring to make a communication here. It doesn't just say things that you already know are true, but that is a real gift and that helps catalyze some new insight and an ability to be a more committed and more truly holistic practitioner. And that comes from all of my intelligence. You know, there's a brain up here, but there's a brain in the heart and there's a brain in the gut, neurocardiology, neuroenterology. And I want to integrate all the best intelligence in this being. And I want to show up in a way that sees the divine humanity of others, but also is nobody's fool, and who offers all of my life of practice and whatever maturity I can as a sort of a bridge that others can cross into a place where you're moving with what's best in you. That's like an interruption of the momentum of what I was saying before. Well, that act of interrupting myself that I just did as I tried to answer this question, that's practice. And that's something we all do well to do many times a day. So if we're really becoming practitioners, and there's some of that quality that I pointed to with that word repentance, that turnabout, so that I'm enacting a turnabout, and the better angels of my nature are coming forward. You know, under crisis conditions, the best in human beings and the worst in human beings tends both to come out. And if we can find our way to the very, very best versions of ourselves again and again and again, it's like we're in this crisis of fragmentation, but like an immune response, when you show up like that, you're a force for coherence and for wholesome, healthy interconnection, interbeing, and the fundamental prior unity of the whole human family and the more than human, the family that includes all of life, that reasserts its own integrity. And we can be that integrity resurging in this crisis time. And that's, you know, we're all gonna die. We know how this goes, you know. We have wonderful gifts, we have really good days, we have amazing, wonderful openings and awakenings, and we have bad days, and we have setbacks, and we get sick, and we get old, and we definitely die. And we know that everything we love will be taken from us. And that this is not a disaster, this is the cycle of life and death. And that the sacredness of life implies the sacredness of dying. And so there's a kind of giving of yourself then to the higher health, the thing that you care about that survives your own passing, and getting a chance to write your name in the book of life in a way that's beautiful and true and good and free and conscious and loving and joyous, and affirms everything of value, and that doesn't dissociate from pain, that lets grief be a source of wisdom too, doesn't push it away, and finds gratitude for that whole enchilada. That's how I want to do the living I have left to do and the dying I have left to do. And I want to help others be better at doing that too, and better at doing it with others, so that we can follow what's breaking our heart, but also follow the unfolding of our unique genius, and do it with our friends for the benefit of everything, and everything we love, and the future of everything that we love.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Absolutely, I'm with you. And let's see, so Carla shares, she says, I'm a former public defender. The racial and economic injustices have been going on for a long time. Good news, the awareness is now present, change is coming. And I'm with you, Carla. And that's the beautiful thing about this whole, the protests and that are going on all over the world. Actually, it's spread outside of the United States with this George Floyd thing, where we can see that discrimination really never left us. So those of us in privilege that are white, that aren't coming from communities of color, sometimes we kid ourselves and think, well, back in Martin Luther King's day, we made all of this progress, and after all, Obama was elected president. But my friends that are of color share no. There are little things that happen all the time. So I'm with you. I'm guessing you're with Carla here too, huh, Terry, on that?
Well, I think I honor and agree about that. I've had an interesting relationship to this, and I want to make a confession. I think this is a big place for the repentance of white people. Now, I grew up in this interracial, this intentional community I grew up in was interracial, and so my friends growing up were interracial, and so I had African American and Japanese American, various friends that were not white. But once I went into the ashram, it was mostly white, and then the world of the people who are interested in the philosophical and the spiritual ideas that were, to me, most alive and exciting were mostly white. I liked being in nature. I moved to a community that had a lot of nature, and it was mostly white. And so I've lived a mostly white life. But my son, who grew up in that mostly white world, went off to Brooklyn. He really enjoyed being in a more diverse world, and he just got married. And now we have an interracial family. And so I've had a lot of opportunity to be close with people of color, and to feel like, like when I was growing up, it was us, me and people of color, Jews and all the kind of people that might, and then the man who was sort of racist or something, that was the them, the us. But I still benefited from all kinds of invisible white privilege. And there was always a way that the horrific treatment of African Americans by police that we're now seeing in the cell phone era, all this stuff we're seeing, this is not new. This stuff has been going on all along. It's just nobody had cell phones, and so we didn't know about it. And so there is a quality to the constant oppression and danger that particularly young Black men are living in. And we all know how I was when I was a young white man, when I was 16 to 25. I had all kinds of piss and vinegar in me, and and if I was subjected to injustice, I wanted to come back. And so we've got a situation that then elicits violent or resentful or just criminal behavior, and then has exaggerated punishment for it. And that's why we have this huge incarceration rate. And we don't know what it's like to be a person of color. And so there's a kind of holding of the fact that, gosh, here I am. I understood some things about the necessary brotherhood of all people. And yet, because I was in a white supremacist culture, I just kind of, in some ways, followed the path of least resistance and ended up in an envelope of white privilege. And in some respects, perhaps have, by not constantly objecting to it, I've acquiesced to it too much. I'm examining myself. I'm interrogating myself. And I think that all caring white people who really aspire to loving solidarity with the humanity of everyone have some work to do in that way. Now, having said that, I want to say something else, which makes it even harder, but I think it's worth saying. There are also a lot of people who are, you know, when we were evolving over the millions of years we were in hunter-gatherer tribes, the most important distinction was my tribe or the other tribe, us and them. And this ethnocentric orientation has characterized most human beings through most of human history. And it's actually got neurological connections. And in effect, what that means is everybody tends in a little way to be ethnocentric or racist, or at least implicit bias. And we can't make that a sin and ask people to be ashamed of themselves over that, because it's part of the equipment. And there are a lot of white people, some of them who are racist, who are still going to be a part of, at least in this country, in the United States, the larger community. We're not going to have a peaceful resolution after the next election unless a lot of people who've been voting Republican are a part of that family. And so there's a reckoning that allows us to have some kind of brother sisterhood with some of those people too. And what is the way that I can come into integrity with my non-white family and friends? And how can I come into integrity with the people who are triggered by social justice, microaggressions and political correctness, and who have a backlash going on? That's a big bridge too. We got a wound here and a wound here, or at least a gulf. How do we bridge all of that at once? Well, we're going to have to become way more mature, generous, but also fierce. Love is going to have to be able to roar with maybe quietly sometimes, but presence. Love is going to have to presence itself and assert its natural authority over anger and fear and dread and shame and all of the darker emotions that are tending to hijack our nervous system. And that work is deep work, and every one of us is a front line in that battle. It's being fought in every heart. And that work, nobody's finished that work. I haven't finished that work. My best answer to questions about racial injustice is to stay in the question myself, is to not think that my good intentions are enough, and to be humbly interested in a deeper brotherhood, but not just exclusively in that direction. Like, yeah, and I want to do that in a way that doesn't just dissociate me from other people who also need to be part of this human family coming together. And I feel like that's going to require a kind of maturity of all of us that we are just at the beginning of developing.
Yes, life is a journey, isn't it? It's not a destination. It's very much of a journey. And with all of and you put beautiful words around that journey, Terry, as you described all of the many dimensions to it. So beautiful. And your son, in a interracial marriage out in Brooklyn, that's kind of neat. I'm learning about you here too during this program. So one of my first girlfriends was a beautiful woman of color, and I've actually, that was just the first girlfriend. I'm happily married now, but when I was dating, yeah, I was in a number of times in these interracial couple things. Well, listen, this hour has gone really fast here, so I want to just share a few things because we're just down to a few minutes left. So during this time of the pandemic, this coronavirus pandemic, Humanities Team is offering, we doubled the number of half scholarships that we're offering. We've doubled the number, or actually, I think we weren't offering full scholarships. Now we're offering full scholarships as well. So to those of you that maybe lost a job, Want to invite you to reach out to us about the half and full scholarships. If you have a job and you still have your income source, want to invite you not to reach out to us because we're trying to reserve those for people that really would like to go through one of these master classes and they don't have the capacity. So if you're one of those, do reach out to us. Also, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, so you can go to our humanitiesteam.org website and you can donate in support of the scholarships. We're finding that there are numbers of people in our community that resonate with that. So invite you to go to the humanitiesteam.org website and donate in support of the scholarships as well. So with that, I would like to bring on our team so I can, these are my partners. Terry, I want to thank you so much for being here with me during the hour. So much wisdom and a real blessing to be with you. We met in
Thank you so much, Steve. I love always being with you and the Humanities Team community. It's been a real grace. I'll throw up a little chat if people are interested to find out more about our nonprofit work. I'll stick that URL in there just so it's.
Please do, and I know beingofbenefit.com. If you want to go there to support.
Yeah, well, that's for the community, and then the nonprofit is newrepublicoftheheart.org. Thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah, Terry, thank you for being with us and looking forward to having you back. Terry's hosting a panel during Global Oneness Day this year, so we get to work together here on some.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. Thanks so much. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks
Blessings.
For being here. And Dee Meyer, I want to introduce her. She's the director of our operations. She's my partner. You can see Barbara Tripp in the window. Tim Noah. Tim does every other program here, but does a beautiful job. He's had his mother, who's also very gifted and a real important thought leader, Karen Noe, on during programs. Though Tim's got some other guests coming up. I mentioned Barbara Tripp, Garth Catterall, Karen Gordon. So Karen leads the editorial group, the communications group. Garth leads the IT. Tim is the genius in 5 or 6 different departments, and is wonderful on camera too. So, and Barbara's new with the group. So these are some of my partners. We're 17 years old, and I get to work with these beautiful people all day long. And we've created we all on the conscious journey want to create a loving home, right? But you can actually create a loving work environment. How's that? So we get to create that, which is really cool. So, and that includes all of you. Thank you for being with us here during your Friday. So peace and blessings and gratitude for sharing an hour with us here today. We're back on the air in a couple of weeks where Tim's going to have a special guest with him. You'll watch out for, watch your email. You'll see a communication on that. So you all have a fabulous weekend here. And thanks again for being with us. And namaste to all of you.